Picture this. 1793. France is tearing itself apart. The revolution is in full swing. The king is dead, and the reign of terror is just beginning. In the south, the vital port city of Toulon has done the unthinkable. It has rebelled against the new republic and invited in its mortal enemies, the British and Spanish fleets. For the young, fragile French Republic, this is a crisis of epic proportions. Losing Toulon could mean the end of the revolution itself. But out of this chaos, a young, unknown artillery captain is about to step onto the world stage and change the course of history forever. His name, Napoleon D. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into the battle that launched a legend. The Siege of Toulon. This isn't just a story about cannons and forts. It's the origin story of the man who would become Emperor Napoleon. So, how did a 24-year-old Corsican nobody orchestrate one of the most decisive victories in French history? Let's find out. First, let's set the scene. Toulon wasn't just any port. It was the heart of the French Mediterranean fleet, home to nearly a third of the entire French navy. When royalist rebels took control of the city, they knew they couldn't hold it alone against the Republican army. So, they made a desperate deal with the devil, handing the city and its massive arsenal over to British Admiral Samuel Ludi. Suddenly, the most powerful naval base in southern France was in enemy hands. The Republican government in Paris was panicking. They sent an army under General Jean-François Carteau to retake the city. But it was a disaster. Carteau was a painter by trade, not a soldier, and he had no idea how to conduct a siege. His plan was clumsy, his attacks were weak, and his army was getting nowhere. The French were stuck, morale was plummeting, and the British were digging in, fortifying the heights around the harbor. The situation looked hopeless. And then, fate intervened. The Republican Army's commander of artillery, Colonel Daumartin, was seriously wounded in a minor skirmish. They needed a replacement, and they needed one fast. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte. At this point, he was just an ambitious but obscure artillery officer. He had recently written a pro-revolutionary pamphlet, Le Super de Boucaille, which had caught the eye of Antoine Salicetti, a powerful politician from Corsica who was overseeing the siege. Salicetti pulled some strings and got his young compatriot the promotion. On September 16, 1793, Captain Bonaparte arrived at the French camp. He was appalled by what he saw. The artillery was a mess. Guns were poorly positioned, powder and shot were scarce, and the men were disorganized. General Carteaux's plan was to simply bombard the city into submission, which Napoleon instantly recognized as pure foolishness. Napoleon knew that a direct assault on the city of Toulon would be a bloodbath. The key wasn't the city itself, but the harbor. The British fleet was the real power here. If he could force the fleet to leave, the city would be forced to surrender. And how do you force a fleet of powerful wooden warships to leave a harbor? You make their position untenable. You threaten to sink them where they anchor. His eyes fell on a specific point of land. A high promontory called L'Aiguillette, which commanded a perfect view of both the inner and outer roads of the harbor. The British had also recognized its importance, and had built a strong fort on its highest point, which they nicknamed Little Gibraltar. Napoleon formulated a simple, brilliant plan. Capture Little Gibraltar. From there, his cannons could rain hell down upon Admiral Hood's fleet. The British ships would either have to flee or be destroyed. It was a fantastic plan, but he had to convince his incompetent superiors. General Carteau scoffed at the idea. He famously said, "This young man knows little of geography." He wanted to stick to his own failing strategy. Napoleon was furious, but relentless. He wrote scathing letters. He lobbied the political representatives on site, and he used his superior knowledge of artillery to prove his point. He argued, debated, and schemed. Finally, after weeks of frustration, Carteau was removed and replaced by General Dugommier, a seasoned professional soldier. Dugommier was a different breed. He listened to the passionate young artillery expert. He convened a council of war, where Napoleon laid out his plan with such clarity and force that Dugommier was immediately won over. He gave Napoleon his full backing and the resources he desperately needed. Napoleon went to work with incredible energy. He requisitioned guns from all over southern France. established workshops to manufacture cannonballs, and trained his gunners relentlessly. He was everywhere, personally sighting cannons, directing earthworks, and inspiring his men. He was so dedicated that he even caught a nasty skin disease from using the ramrod of a fallen gunner. The soldiers began to respect and admire this tireless, brilliant officer. They nicknamed one of his batteries the Battery of the Men Without Fear. The stage was set for the final assault. For weeks, the French artillery, now expertly organized by Napoleon, engaged in a massive duel with the British and Allied forts. The night of December 17th was chosen for the main attack on Little Gibraltar. A vicious winter storm broke out, with driving rain and howling winds. It was the perfect cover. Under the cloak of darkness and the storm, French columns advanced. The fighting was brutal and chaotic. Hand-to-hand in the mud and the dark, the initial French assault faltered, and for a moment, it seemed like it might fail. General Dugommier was shaken, but Napoleon was right there, rallying the troops, leading a fresh column himself. It is said he had a horse shot out from under him and was wounded in the thigh by a British bayonet wound that nearly cost him his leg and left him with a permanent scar. But he pushed on. Finally, after hours of savage combat, the French tricolor was raised over Little Gibraltar. The key to Toulon had been taken. As dawn broke on December 18th, Napoleon's prediction came true. He immediately ordered his cannons to be hauled up the captured height. As the guns began to fire on the anchored British fleet, Admiral Hood knew the game was up. His position was completely exposed. He gave the order to evacuate. The withdrawal was panicked and chaotic. The British and Spanish tried to destroy the French ships they couldn't take with them, setting the naval arsenal and magazines ablaze. The city was engulfed in fire and explosions. Thousands of French royalist civilians, terrified of Republican reprisals, crammed onto the departing ships or any vessel they could find, desperate to escape. It was a scene of utter horror and destruction. By December 19th, the last Allied ship had left the harbor, and Republican troops entered the reconquered city of Toulon. The siege was over. It was a stunning victory for the French Republic, securing their entire Mediterranean coast. And for Napoleon Bonaparte, his life was changed forever. His plan had worked perfectly. He had proven his military genius on a grand stage. From an unknown captain, he was promoted to brigadier general at the age of 24. His name was now on the lips of the most powerful men in Paris. He had taken his first, decisive step on the path that would lead him to command armies, topple kingdoms, and ultimately crowned himself Emperor of the French. The legend of Napoleon had begun, not in the grand palaces of Paris, but in the mud and blood of the Siege of Toulon. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Napoleon's first victory, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more epic history stories. Let me know in the comments what other battles you'd like to see covered. Until next time.